Welcome to Stab the Dragon Productions on Monday, May 30th, 2022, for a special Memorial Day edition. In this episode, I want to study the history and meaning of Memorial Day, which is a national holiday here in America, and I want to look at how the church in America celebrates or ignores this holiday. What should a Bible-believing Christian do with secular patriotic holidays? What should churches do? Is it appropriate for a church in America to sing patriotic songs, display the flag during regular Sunday worship on these secular patriotic holidays? Can Christians even be patriotic in a nation that seems to have gone over the cliff morally in so many ways? It's my belief that the church can participate in limited ways during these patriotic holidays. In fact, if we fail to teach our children a proper biblical patriotism, I think we're bringing some harm to society and even to the church's mission. Worse, I think we're showing ingratitude towards God. Conversely, if we uncritically jump on the patriotic bandwagon, we can do harm to the gospel mission. Currently in America, in fact for at least the last 2 generations now, there's been a surge of anti-patriotism in our schools, our universities, Hollywood, the lamestream media, big business, and the church that has greatly harmed America and is hindering the mission of the church. From ancient times, armies and nations have honored their warriors who died in battle. It's a very human thing to do. If you've ever read Homer's Iliad, you'll remember the way that Achilles honored Patroclus after his glorious death. So let's look at the history and meaning of our Memorial Day holiday. First, what are the American patriotic holidays? There are 4 on our calendar every year. You've got Independence Day, or the 4th of July. That celebrates our formal Declaration of Independence from England in 1776. It's usually accompanied by fireworks and sometimes parades. Then you've got Veterans Day, and that used to be called Armistice Day a long time ago. It's celebrated on November 11th every year, which is the anniversary of the signing of the armistice with Germany in 1918, which brought about the end of World War I. It became a federal holiday in 1938, and after World War II, there was a move to expand Armistice Day to celebrate all military veterans, and in 1954, Congress passed a law changing the name of Armistice Day to Veterans Day. Third, you've got President's Day, and that began as a celebration of Washington's birthday on February 22nd and was made a federal holiday in 1879. The Uniform Monday Holiday Act of 1968 moved the celebration to the 3rd Monday of February. Now what that does is it gives federal workers a 3-day holiday and other union people. But what it also does is it splits the difference between Lincoln's birthday on the 12th of February and Washington's on the 22nd. So that's why it's now called President's Birthday. But there's a couple of other presidents born in February, including, I think, Ronald Reagan. Then there's Memorial Day. That's the 4th holiday. It's the last Monday in May and is to honor those who have died in the service of their country in the armed forces. And then additionally, there's a few other days of observance that are not federal holidays. You've got Armed Forces Day, which is on the 3rd Saturday of May, and Flag Day, which is June 14th. And then you've got the various branches of the armed forces that have their birthday anniversaries scattered throughout the year. So that's the holidays in general. So now let's look at Memorial Day more closely. What is Memorial Day? How do we celebrate it? This is a somber day of remembrance and mourning, and therefore it's done differently. It's a day of remembrance of the war heroes who did not come home. And the ceremonies are usually held in cemeteries with flowers and flags placed on graves. There may be speeches by veterans or politicians that are usually a part of the ceremony. We tend to not greet each other with a Happy Memorial Day greeting because that's really kind of inappropriate. It's not necessarily a joyful celebration kind of a day, although there is some Thanksgiving involved because we are rejoicing in the freedoms that we have, but we're remembering those freedoms were purchased by people's lives in the armed forces. So in our culture, though, sadly, Memorial Day has become all about the sales events. And that's kind of a cheapening of the culture, I believe. Again, no parades, no fireworks. Sporting events continue on. I was in Lowe's shopping with my son this afternoon at 3 o'clock, and apparently all across the country at 3 o'clock, taps is played. And Lowe's played taps right at 3 o'clock, 1500 hours, over their loudspeaker system. There was a flag right outside the front door stuck in the ground, and so, we were in the process of checking out, and so I stopped, I saluted the flag. If you can't see a flag but you hear taps, you can salute the sound of the music. And so, that celebration was going on all throughout America today. Um, a lot of people do barbecues, backyard barbecues, or maybe a trip to the lake. And family events are fine if you're off work. I mean, I'm not saying we need to all show up at the cemetery, but when my children were young, we went to a few Memorial Day services at local cemeteries, and that was a blessing. That really was special. Uh, as a federal holiday, there's no mail delivered. Banks and federal offices are closed. A lot of businesses are closed. My wife's place of work had reduced hours today. So, there's a lot of things like that go on this holiday. What about flag etiquette? Well, it is a day that we would want to, put the flag out on the front porch, fly it from the top of the house or whatever. But if you've got a full-sized flagpole, there's a proper way to do that, and that's you raise your flag and then you lower it to half staff at sunrise, and then at noon you raise it back up to full staff. And so that's the proper flag etiquette for Memorial Day. Otherwise, at cemeteries, people, are placing flags and flowers on the graves. Sometimes presidents will go to the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier and lay a wreath on Memorial Day. They'll do that on Veterans Day as well, usually. So, there's a couple of different things that can be done there. So now let's look at the history of Memorial Day. A lot of times we don't think about, hey, where did this holiday come from? But I think if you study the history of something, you learn to appreciate it a bit more. Well, in 1966, the Congress passed what's called the House Concurrent Resolution 587, and President Lyndon Johnson signed it into law, and that designated Waterloo, New York as the birthplace of Memorial Day. But the committee that presented that resolution did not do any proper historical study. They just went with it. Some congressmen probably thought, hey, Waterloo, New York is where it started. So that law was poorly researched, and it was in fact in gross error. The current Memorial Day was officially designated by the federal government to be observed on the last Monday of May since 1971, and that Uniform Holiday Act that they did, where instead of doing things on a proper date, it moves things to Mondays so that everybody gets a 3-day weekend, right? But on that occasion, they did call it Memorial Day, and so that was, officially naming it and fixing the date as the last Monday of May. But prior to that, Memorial Day had been observed on May 30th in most places, and that goes all the way back to 1868. The name had been actually two different names for Memorial Day have been in place most of history. Decoration Day and Memorial Day. They're used contemporaneously. In other words, if you read some original source documents, original newspapers dating from the late 1800s, you'll see in one paragraph Decoration Day and Memorial Day meaning the same event. Okay, so it's always had two names until Congress straightened that out. Memorial Day as a national observance was started by General John A. Logan, a Union officer who fought in the Battle of Atlanta. And that fact that he fought in the Battle of Atlanta comes into play later in the story. In 1868, he was the national commander of the GAR, the Grand Army of the Republic, which was a veterans organization formed after the Civil War. And he called in 1868, he called for an annual observance of Decoration Day or Memorial Day on May 30th. This observance would include placing flowers and wreaths on the graves of soldiers who died in the Civil War. Logan was by this time a congressman in Illinois. He was not living, nor had he ever lived, in Waterloo, New York. But did the general come up with this idea, or did he get it from somewhere else? Keep in mind that he ended the war in Georgia. Newspapers across the nation printed Logan's call for an annual Memorial Day observation or observance, but many of those articles all across the nation, and I've sourced this, I'll show you the source in a little bit, and they cite all these newspapers, quote the newspapers, show the newspapers. But they added, and this is in 1868, that the tradition had been going on in the South since the end of the war 3 years earlier. Some papers actually criticized General Logan for adopting a Southern custom. Logan himself, in an 1866 speech, so 2 years before he calls for the national observance, an 1866 speech mentions that this custom came from Georgia, which is where he finished the war. Now, in this book by Daniel Belware and Richard Gardner, The Genesis of the Memorial Day Holiday in America, published in Columbus, Georgia by Columbus State University in 2014. The authors trace the origin of this custom to a letter to the editor submitted to the Columbus Daily Sun and the Columbus Daily Inquirer by one each Mary Ann Williams, the widow of Colonel Charles J. Williams. He was the commander of the 1st Georgia Regiment of Regulars in Civil War. She was writing as the secretary of the Ladies Memorial Association of Columbus, Georgia. So let me read the letter from this book by Belware and Gardner, pages 39 and 40. So bear with me a little bit. Columbus, Georgia, March 10th, 1866. Editors, the ladies are now, and have been for several days, engaged in the sad but pleasant duty of ornamenting and improving that portion of the city cemetery sacred to the memory of our gallant Confederate dead. But we feel it unfinished work unless a day be set apart annually for its especial attention. We cannot raise monumental shafts and inscribe thereon their many deeds of heroism, but we can keep alive the memory of the debt we owe them by dedicating at least one day in each year to embellishing their humble graves with flowers. Therefore, we beg the assistance of the press and the ladies throughout the South to aid us in our effort to set apart a certain day to be observed from the Potomac to the Rio Grande, and be handed down through times as a religious custom of the country to wreath the graves of our martyred dead with flowers. Notice the religious language that permeates this. We would propose a day of April, and they left the day blank, as at that time our land may be truly be called the land of flowers. Let every city, town, and village join in the pleasant duty. Let all be alike remembered, from the heroes of Manassas to those who expired amid the death throes of our hallowed cause. We'll crown alike the honored resting places of the immortal Jackson in Virginia, Johnson of Shiloh and Cleburne in Tennessee, and the host of gallant privates who adorned our ranks. All did their duty, and to all we owe our gratitude. Let the soldier's grave for that day at least be the southern Mecca, to whose shrine her sorrowing women, like pilgrims, may annually bring their grateful hearts and floral offerings. And when we remember the thousands who were buried with their martial cloaks around them, without Christian ceremony of interment for their beloved bodies, we would invoke the aid of the most thrilling eloquence throughout the land to inaugurate this custom by delivering on the appointed day this year an eulogy on the unburied dead of our glorious Southern Army. They died for their country. Whether their country had or had not the right to demand the sacrifice is no longer a question of discussion with us. We leave that for future nation to decide. That it was demanded, that they nobly responded and fell holy sacrifices upon their country's altar, and are thereby entitled to their country's gratitude, none will deny. The proud banner under which they rallied in defense of the noblest cause for which heroes fought, or trusting women prayed, has been furled forever. The country for which they suffered and died has now no name or place among the nations of the earth. Legislative enactment may not now be made to do honor to their memories, but the veriest radical that ever traced his genealogy back to the deck of the Mayflower could not deny us the simple privilege of paying honor to those who died defending the life, honor, and happiness of Southern women. Quite the letter. I mean, I love reading 19th century literature for that very reason. Just the way they wrote back then. And again, notice the religious imagery all throughout. So this letter that went to those Columbus newspapers was reprinted all across the South. And it became the custom and was adopted by General Logan and the North in 1868, but with the change in dates to the 30th of May because of the later blooming of flowers up north. So changed from April, and it ended up being April 26th, so it changed from being late April to late May. But was the Southern Memorial Day just for Confederate soldiers' graves? No. Belware and Gardner demonstrate that several cities in the South in 1866 honored the dead of both sides by placing flowers on the graves of Federal and Confederate soldiers. In some places, there were Federal soldiers as an occupying force who were encouraged to participate in these post-war memorial ceremonies. In 1867, Francis Miles Finch of Ithaca, New York, and there's where New York comes in, read a report in the New York Tribune that reported the women of Columbus, Mississippi, had placed flowers on the graves of Confederate and Union soldiers in their ceremony. Now, the importance of Columbus, Mississippi is that that was actually the first place in 1866 that this celebration happened, even though it was originated in Columbus, Georgia. And so there's a little bit of confusion, Columbus, Georgia, Columbus, Mississippi. What happened was the newspapers around Columbus, Mississippi, even up in St. Louis, printed the wrong date. The Columbus papers had put, and other papers had put the 26th of April, and there was a typo, and the people in Columbus, in their paper, it was 25th of April. And so they did celebrate it on the 25th of April, and therefore they were the first place to celebrate this nationwide ceremony. So and you combine the names of the two towns and then the mix up with the date, and that's how Columbus, Mississippi enters it. But Finch, then, in New York, writing from New York, said, "When I read those lines, it struck me that the South was holding out a friendly hand, and that it was our duty, not only as conquerors, but also as men and their fellow citizens of the nation, to grasp it." He then wrote and published a poem in the Atlantic Monthly called "The Blue and the Gray." So I've got a copy of that poem here in my copy of the Library of America, American Poetry, the 19th Century, Volume 2. So this is Francis Miles Finch, "The Blue and the Gray." By the flow of the inland river, whence the fleets of iron have fled, where the blades of the grave grass quiver, asleep are the ranks of the dead. Under the sod and the dew, waiting the judgment day, under the one the blue, under the other the gray. These in the robings of glory, those in the gloom of defeat, all with the battle blood gory, in the dusk of eternity meet. Under the sod and the dew, waiting the judgment day, under the laurel the blue, under the willow the gray. From the silence of sorrowful hours, the desolate mourners go, lovingly laden with flowers, alike for friend and foe. Under the sod and the dew, waiting the judgment day, under the roses the blue, under the lilies the gray. So with an equal splendor, the morning sun rays fall with a touch impartially tender on the blossoms blooming for all, under the sod and the dew, waiting the judgment day, broidered with gold the blue, mellowed with gold the gray. So, when the summer calleth on forest and field of grain, with an equal murmur falleth the cooling drip of the rain, under the sod and the dew, waiting the judgment day, wet with the rain the blue, wet with the rain the gray. Sadly, but not with upbraiding, the generous deed was done, In the storm of the years that are fading, no braver battle was won. Under the sod and the dew, waiting the judgment day. Under the blossoms, the blue. Under the garlands, the gray. No more shall the war cry sever, or the winding rivers be red. They banish our anger forever when they laurel the graves of our dead. Under the sod and the dew, waiting the judgment day. Love and tears for the blue. Tears and love for the gray. I get choked up just reading that. That's awesome. That poem, again, written in 1867. That poem went on to be used in schools for the next close to 100 years. Students would memorize that poem. It was required reading, required memorization in a lot of schools all throughout both North and South. And there's a lot of, again, religious language and imagery throughout that poem. But that's just a very powerful poem. And what that does is it unites the blue and the gray. And so what Francis Miles Finch was saying is that, hey, what the Southerners are doing by placing flowers on both the Confederate and Union graves is reaching out to us. And so Finch reaches out to them with this poem. So there's the history of Memorial Day. Started in Columbus, Georgia in 1866. And it was national in intent because they adorned the graves of both the blue and the gray. And then General Logan picked that up in 1968 and spread it through the northern states, even though he was heavily criticized for that by some. So the fourth thing I want to talk about is the church and Memorial Day. This section is my personal observations and opinion. I'm the grandson of a World War I veteran, Purple Heart, the son of a World War II combat veteran, European theater. I served in the U.S. Army Infantry in the Cold War. I've got a son who's a career soldier and a veteran of the Iraq War. I was raised primarily in Oklahoma in the 60s and 70s. I'm a product of public schools and the University of Oklahoma. Lifelong Southern Baptist, graduate of Southwestern Baptist Theological Seminary, and I pastored a small Baptist church for 15 years near a military base here in Fort Worth. All the churches that I had been in until the last 15 years had been largely influenced by members who had served in the military and were veterans of World War I, II, Korea, Vietnam. The church I've been in for the past 15 years has very little military presence. It's got some, but very little. Despite our proximity to the base, we are close to the base. With the exception of this current church, which is less than 20 years old and is predominantly in a demographic of under 40 years of age, it's a part of the Young, Restless, and Reformed movement within the Southern Baptist Convention. So apart from this church, every church I've been a part of for my entire life has participated in the patriotic holidays to some extent. Younger churches in the Young, Restless, Reformed movement and pastors born after 1980, not so much. In social media, I'm a part of a couple of groups that includes a lot of Baptist ministers and believers and other Reformed people from Presbyterian and other places. In those groups, they're pretty much anti-patriotic. These churches have removed the flag from the stage. They don't participate in patriotic holidays, and when I speak with them, are quite adamant about not including anything about America in any worship service. No patriotic hymns, no announcements, no prayers. Why? What's going on here? Theologically, within the Young, Restless, Reformed movement, there is a gospel-centeredness, which is a good thing for the most part. Generally speaking, the preaching is very thorough, biblical, theologically rich. It's not as manipulative emotionally as the old-style preaching I grew up with. In fact, I am enjoying the best preaching of my life in my current church, where I've been for 15 years. Missiological. These churches are very missions-minded and send missionaries overseas regularly, send people on lay mission trips all the time. The thrust is to export the gospel, not Americanism, which again is good for the most part. These days, we are much more likely to have people attending and joining from all over the world. Our church has always been have a little international flair. People from all over the world come to our church. And so you don't want to be waving the flag. A patriotic church is considered to be against the multicultural nature of the gospel. The kingdom of God transcends the nations, right? We don't want to intimidate our internationals with Americanism. And part of this anti-Americanism is due to the culture wars of the last 50 years. I've spoken with pastors who despise America as being totally evil because of Roe v. Wade, LGBTQ, same-sex marriage, and what have you. Some have told me they could not, in good conscience, even say the Pledge of Allegiance anymore. This anti-Christian hatred of the left in America is part of this, as the left runs almost every single institution in America. But some of these same pastors are now also as woke can be. And wokeism comes from where? Marxism. So go figure. Also, I'm going to say poor education is resulting in this. I believe that these younger pastors and church members are reflecting the type of education that has predominated in the public schools and the universities of the past 40 years. If American history has been taught as it used to be taught, that when I was young, that would be a different story. But no, American history has been tainted by Howard Zinn's style of communist critique of America. Civics and economics has not been taught, and so we don't know our Constitution or flag etiquette or how our system is supposed to work. Socialism has crept in. We've been poisoned by the news media and Hollywood. So all these factors come into this. It also seems to me that as Americanism and patriotism have declined, so too the church has declined. Atheism has increased. Funny how those two things have gone together. Peculiar that. Fifth, let's look at this. How do we fix it? Can churches participate in Memorial Day services? Recognize that we worship in freedom here in America, at least so far. And we have opulent buildings, nice stuff generally, or at least we did until Bidenflation hit us hard. Where do these blessings come from? The anti-American pastors would quickly say, God. And the woke ones would say, well, we stole it from the Indians and the slaves. But how does God give us the liberty and freedom we enjoy? Through the actions and thoughts of people, through the founders of our country, and the soldiers who purchased that freedom with their blood and sacrifices. When you look at the nature of most men of most time and compare that with our freedom and prosperity of today, we see that God has blessed us above and beyond what 99% of the rest of the world has ever had. And so God used hard, tough men to win these freedoms and prosperity. Then we must not thank God alone. We must thank and remember the men whom God used and who sacrificed so much for us. And this is what Memorial Day does. Men died on the field of battle all around the world so that we might preach the gospel in safety, freedom, and prosperity. And we can't even mention them in a prayer on Memorial Day Sunday? Really? That at least borders on the sin of ingratitude, maybe even hubris. Secondly, how are we to correct this? Pastors, just as the faith you proclaim you receive from others, so too the freedom you have to proclaim that faith you receive from others, by God's grace. Educate yourselves in American history and our founding, our political traditions and theory, our economic theory. You need to correct your theology so that you can show a sense of gratitude to God and those whom God has used in years gone by so that you could be free today. The freedom of religion, the freedom to proclaim the gospel was given to you by God through the sacrifices of hard, tough men. Honor God and honor those men. Some practical steps. Mention Memorial Day in your announcements, your church newsletter. At least include, or in the bulletin on Sunday morning, at least include a prayer of thanks to God for the sacrifices of men who have handed us the freedoms we enjoy today. There may be a patriotic song or two that could be sung without violating your conscience. For churches that are older, maybe check and see if any members from that church actually died in combat, or if there are any children who lost a parent in battle. Take your youth or a children's group to a Memorial Day service on Memorial Day. Sixth, this book that I referred to earlier, I highly recommend. The Genesis of the Memorial Day Holiday in America by Bellware and Gardner. I got this book this week on Thursday and finished it on Sunday. It does have a lot of pictures, and it's only 186 pages, but it's got 437 footnotes, and I read a lot of those footnotes. Not only does it tell the story of Memorial Day in a wonderful way, it absolutely schools you on how to do history. This book was a masterpiece of historical methodology. I'm a history nerd, so that counts. This is going into my church library when my wife gets done with it, and I recommend it for yours. In conclusion, there is no doubt that America is far different than it was 50 years ago when I was a kid. Morally, we've gone down the toilet. Politically and economically, we've gone over the cliff. We're in for a crash landing. We're in free fall right now. I firmly believe that God has already started judging us, but there's a time yet for repentance, for change, both spiritually and culturally. For sure, turning to Christ is the biggest part of the answer. We need a heaven-sent, Christ-centered, Spirit-led, Bible-based revival, the size of the Great Awakening or the Reformation. But even now, though, some of my Christian brothers in Baptist churches have a worldview that is riddled with Marxism, and that is distressing. So, part of this repentance is looking at the blessings of liberty that God has entrusted to us and saying, thank you, with a Memorial Day observance before those blessings are gone forever. John Adams said, liberty once lost is lost forever. Be careful what you have, you might lose it. In hoc signo vincis, Stab the Dragon, out here.